Hi everyone, my name is Živa Kleindienst, and together with Tadej Vindiš, Aleksandra Kostić and Peter Tomaž Dobrila, I am one of the curators of the International Festival of Arts, Technology and Science, KIBLIX 2021, entitled Virtual Worlds Now. I welcome you on behalf of KIBLA, who has been organizing this festival since 2002. With a new long-term focus of KIBLA on XR technologies and art in scope of RUC, Art and Cultural Research Centers, and considering that the past year has probably been the most virtual year we have lived so far, our key question we're asking for this festival is, what are the virtual worlds now? In December 2020, we launched KIBLIX panel discussion series, where we bring together international professionals working in the fields of art, technology and science. In the first panels, we focused on the topics such as digital intimacy, XR industries, and we posed questions such as how to bring back long-lost nature with XR technologies. Today, I welcome you on the next panel discussion. This time, we will focus on the questions of festivals, production and presentations in the time of the pandemic. Here, I would like to welcome our tonight's moderator, Peter Tomaž Dobrila, intermedia artist and producer, and a co-curator of the KIBLIX Festival. I would also like to welcome our today's guests, and Peter Tomaž, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you, Živa. Hello, Ms. Ena Hodzic, and hello, Mr. David Reeve. I welcome you with us in this panel that we will discuss festivals and, of course, also other art and cultural events in the time of pandemic. And first of all, maybe I would like also to explain to our watchers and listeners the structure of tonight's panel, which is in the first half divided into let's say a couple of presentations and talks and discussions among our participants of the panel discussion, and the second half will be for the questions from the audience. So welcome to listen and to see, and then of course to raise any question. As we know that these times that are already going for more than 1 year around the globe of this pandemic changed in a way many of our approaches, not only regarding distancing or distances, but also regarding activities. So if, let's say, in some kind of cyber or so-called cyber world, their distance is in a way a proximity, which means that two people like us on a distance are also sharing somehow the same virtual space or the communication platform, but not the same physical space. It's also in a way of the internet to, of course, enlarge all the far away things and objects, and of course also somehow to make them familiar, cultural, known, or of course some kind of equal to our, I would say, normal or daily communication. So nobody ever is, I think, now really pointing big question marks of why to be online, why to make live transmissions of events, and why to make, let's say, such panels, seminars or presentations online, and not in the real space like we were, or physical space like we were used to up until now. But of course not for us, because as we know, all activities that we are doing since the start of our projects and programs are quite ongoing, and they are going on for several years. Whether on the let's say, events, program structuring, curating, organizing, and producing, where we also not only, I would say, somehow incorporate new media or the information communication technologies or the virtual realities or mixed realities, etc., into the real physical presentation of arts, but also we some kind making the extension that even in the early days, I would say from the middle 90s, we started with internet transmission of live events, but of course they were not as much, let's say, popular, mass, or needed, or wanted, or demanded, requested as in these times. So it was all the time, it was more or less just a bit of exotic or artistic, or really in the, I would say, space of needs. Now this is not anymore need, but it's urgency, it's our daily life, it's our daily habit. And so I would like to introduce, of course, first Ena Hodžić, the program coordinator of the Container Zagreb, the organization which is, let's say, doing, I would say, quite famous and attractive festivals of new media or new technologies, and of course sciences, like Touch Me Festival, Device Art Festival, Extravagant Bodies, which are not biennial but trilateral, so exchanging each one, and of course being the partner of the EMAP platform of European media arts. And hello, Mr. David Reeve, so whose, I would say, biography is also very vivid and very varied. So as being an artist in Kibla, we remember the group Što delat that we were hosting some years ago, I think in 2012. And so, and later. And also Mr. Davis Reeve is not only an artist, but since 2018, he's, I believe, the curator of one of the, I would say, oldest and most relevant European or even the world festivals of contemporary arts, which is called Steirischer Herbst in Graz. Started already in 1967, so which is quite some time ago, and always, I would say, accenting or emphasizing the topics of new art, new media, new communication. I would just go again back to the 1987, where there was a big festival dedicated to chaos theory, to computer graphics, to new programmings, to Mandelbrot set, etc., etc. And now, okay, last festival of Ars Electronica was, I think, again, not Ars Electronica, sorry, but Steirischer Herbst, was not the only one, but actually it was one of the first that decided to go completely online. And this was a concept of Paranoia TV. And so, David, I would like to ask you for your input, your presentation, and then we will continue with the discussion. Thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I should say that I'm not the only curator of Paranoia, of Steirischer Herbst. I'm part of a team. Our director or intendant is Yekaterina Djogic, my colleague who I've worked with curatorially also before coming to Steirischer Herbst quite a bit. And somehow it's, I just want to also remind maybe of that collaboration, because this whole thing of Paranoia TV and becoming essentially a new kind of form of festival was for us a continuation of previous curatorial practices, which is that we always sort of like to invent institutions, and we like to pretend to be a different kind of institution than we actually are. So for an example, we did a project together in 2013 where we pretended that all the art institutions of the city were research institutes. I just say this because this is a strategy that generally is linked to a mistrust of the institutional landscape as we know it. And what we saw maybe is, you know, during the when the pandemic hit, for us, it was very much a confirmation that, you know, what is now called the new normal was actually quite normal already to begin with, that there's nothing very new about the situation that we're facing. What's new is indeed this radical restriction of public events, of public venues and public spaces, but they were actually being shut down before. The same goes for, you know, international travel that we all rely upon as festivals to set, you know, to bring international audiences and artists into local settings. There was already a strong tendency of parochialization and fragmentation underway in the institutional frame of the art world. Meanwhile, artists actually remained quite strangely oblivious to all of this. So we were also quite somehow shocked at the, you know, the growth of public paranoia, but also the complacency of some colleagues who really are willing actually to produce for a void and to, you know, to sort of continue working for collectors and for gallery spaces and for white cubes, although that white cube is actually very much in doubt as a public space. So this, we really wanted to insist upon the public dimension of art. And this led us a bit back to the, you know, TV, which is of course the big failed public sphere in a way of the 20th century, the place that succumbed completely to a politics of fear and was overrun almost, you know, like that now TV, for an example, in Russia, it's very clear that the half of the population that watches TV, or that is the half of the population that's willing to put up with Putin and his administration. The other half of the population has just gotten rid of their TVs and doesn't watch this propaganda at all in principle. So, you know, there's a kind of, and there was a perverse interest to inhabit that space on our part, especially now that we knew that nothing would be possible in the way that we did it. You said before that we were one of the first festivals to become virtual, but actually this TV metaphor was also interesting because it has a non-virtual side. So actually TV, as we know now from, you know, this kind of post-TV media reality, has a whole physical setting that many TV shows today or streaming shows today are exploring, you know, things like The Network or whatever, you know, this morning show, whatever. You always see the setup of the TV studio. You always see the physical, you know, being of TV, and which we also found very interesting, and to think about maybe, you know, how does a broadcasting company work? Like, it also actually makes live public events. It sometimes works like a festival, only the emphasis is rather on broadcasting and making that accessible, on making big public events and actually, you know, gaining new audiences or viewers. So that was, our festival in a way had one leg very much in the virtual, because we were commissioning films and, very important to say, serial content. So we were actually saying to artists who never made this kind of work before, wouldn't you like to make a series of, let's say, 10 parts or 8 parts or 4 parts or 3 parts for our channel, and we'll feature it at some interval. That was very interesting to do for us as curators, but also for artists who never worked with this. For an example, from theater world, like Rabia Mroué and Lina Majalani, who made a great series about photos that is completely uncharacteristic of their usually theatrical work. So, you know, and then programming that is also very interesting for a curator who's usually working in, as myself, who's usually working in space, in an installation practice, is to actually try to lay that out and to create structures and forms and thematic threads in time. So this was fascinating, I think, for both the artists and for us as curators. We also commissioned films, you know, feature-length films, where artists actually made very great use of the lockdown. So they suddenly had access, for an example, to empty concert halls or to spaces, or they had really the time and the space also to develop really, you know, highly qualitative work. And surprisingly, I mean, we sort of came with the assumption that everything would be a bit do-it-yourself, you know, and community TV. That was maybe also the association of paranoia TV that we wanted to convey, and the whole design of it. But we were very surprised to see that people are creating extremely qualitative work at home, and that there's a big tradition of that. And one of the sort of emblematic works of our virtual program, video program, is a work by Ahmet Ogut, a kind of small virtual exhibition within an exhibition in the form of a film, where you really see how, you know, film or TV is no longer really TV. It's actually like an exhibition medium, and you can use it to exhibit older work and to show this continuity and this great, you know, sort of substantial history. We also had, maybe just to say, so, you know, we had serial content, video content, a kind of Netflix of art, but we also had a presence in town. We had a big headquarters on the main street of Graz in the Herrengasse, to those of you who know Graz, in a former shoe store that was very visually present also. So people sort of knew that this was happening. Plus there were several interventions in the city as, you know, sort of public art that wasn't necessarily monumental, but rather interventive. Then we also had, we explored other ways of delivery of art. So for an example, we had newspaper, an artist made very poetic newspaper advertisements, or we distributed newspapers through takeaway. So we was using all these different forms that people are got used to during the lockdown in a way, to try to bring art. We made a coloring book for patients in the hospital, which wasn't very well received, I must say. So, you know, we were sort of also risking and trying to understand where are the boundaries, what kind of performances can we do under these circumstances. We did have live performances that were also, you know, all adjusted and all made for this situation. But of course, we had to take special care, and this, I think, will be a continuing feature of all of our work. How do you transmit? How do you broadcast this? You know, how do you slip in and out of the necessary institutional role in order to convey what you're actually doing? So we had a TV news program where the actor who played Sigmund Freud, who announced the virtual 3D character Sigmund Freud, who announced our program, which is sort of funny little gimmick that we had to draw attention to ourselves at the beginning. Who better to announce Paranoia TV than Sigmund Freud, reincarnated in some Unreal Engine face mapping. So the actor actually then slipped out of the costume and became our news anchor, and made a German language Paranoia TV that was really like a community TV. Also showing the people in Graz, it's more for really people Austria-wide and in the German-speaking world to see what this festival that they would usually visit, and it is visited usually, what they would see. So we had a kind of parallel, we had specially commissioned works, but we also had a rather more conventional festival, or part of the festival, going on. And the challenge, I think, for the next edition is how to move from fiction to reality, because clearly, you know, our institutional critique by the form of, you know, fictionalizing ourselves works only to a degree, especially when reality becomes stranger than fiction. So now we're in a difficult situation, because we actually see, okay, you know, like, we can't just turn the festival itself into Paranoia TV. This is actually what festivals are now. I have to say, we also had a rich discussion program with discussions much like this one, some of which was really amazing, with artists, some of which was also very traumatic, because actually we had invited David Graeber to make a big project, and he passed away in the run-up to the festival. We then also arranged a sort of funeral carnival, which was a very unique event, by the way, speaking of proximity and distance in the virtual and the real. All over the world, people made little commemoration ceremonies, carnivals. It was all about masks and wearing masks, but also doing something, reading from his texts and so on. And it was a 12-hour video stream that I was then sort of mixing and moderating from at home. A unique experience, definitely, to anyone who took part in it. And, you know, that's a very new dimension, I think, for festivals. You know, in festivals, usually when there's a durational aspect to it, it's something that's very much local, you know, like sitting around a campfire. There was a thing in Graz before we came called Truth is Concrete, which was very much like that, where, you know, people gathered from all over the world and sat and discussed, and it was very intense. There was a very intense exchange. But here suddenly you have these situations where this could happen over the course of 12 hours as a kind of marathon, you know, of course, under very very extraordinary circumstances with people from all over the world. And I have to say that, you know, so I'm a bit also traumatized from this kind of discussions, because they are, in a sense, very emblematic of a certain time. I think for all of us, the big challenge is how do we keep art and artistic production as something that's still public and accessible and internationally accessible? And how, meanwhile, all of these things become normal, you know, and sort of also boring a bit. You know, how do we keep Zoom conferences interesting? How do we keep online festivals interesting, or their online presence interesting? And it's not just like, oh, it's another streaming, because this is what you hear all the time. And the tendency of art people actually to be this, you know, that reactionary is very strong, because we all, you know, love materials and clay and, you know, making bread, or I don't know. So, you know, this is I think the tendency to insist upon live presence and to say, you know, I won't work anymore in this virtual sphere, I've had it up to here, is actually very strong. And, you know, how do we deal with all of this? It's a big question. So I thank you for your attention. I hope it was condensed enough and short enough to leave enough time for a stimulating discussion. Yeah.
Thank you very much, David. Just now a couple of, let's say, references that you mentioned. I would just remember the Van Gogh TV, or the Piazza Virtuale, that happened on Documenta 9 in Kassel in 1992. As I would say, one of the first so-called not only new channel, but also a new artistic project that was using, let's say, the so-called old technologies like television, modems, telephone lines, you know, faxes even, etc., in somehow, I would say, pre-mobile or pre-internet, in a way, at least as a commodity era. So, which I think really set the whole thing. But then again, you know, from these 90s, when the new media was like an artistic experiment also, then it really was forgotten. I would say these practices almost until these days, maybe until the pandemic, I suppose, because nobody really worked on the live transmission. Okay, there were some, I would say, big houses, big events like opera, transmitting their shows into the squares around cities, or you know, internationally, for some designated people, but not in a way such kind of a social activity or also professional activities that we are pushed into now. But just before I give word to Ena Hodžić, I would also say that Mr. Gerfried Stocker will join us soon, probably in 10 minutes. And so, of course, we will then continue in full team. But Ena, please explain your attitudes, your visions, your realities or virtualities that you had also last year by realizing and producing the Touch Me Festival, which happened also live. And also with some other your festivals that you're preparing, or device art, or of course the extravagant bodies, and overall your situation, position in this moment in Container in Zagreb.
Yes, thank you, Peter, for this introduction. I think for us, the situation was quite the opposite. When we were in the first lockdown period in spring 2020, we were talking about the festival and the situation that was going on, and what should we do, how can we do some things online. You know, we were kind of forced to think about it. It was not our natural way of doing the festival program. And we said, okay, let's wait until June, and then we decide we will have the festival or we will not have it, you know, live, offline. It was a really strange decision to make, because even though you know that you know the situation is like this, and then that you can do some things online and maybe have some audience reach and do some quality things, it was just a really complex thing to think about at this moment, because we are so used to the materiality of the work and live audiences. And of course, the festival that we had in 2020 was called Touch Me Festival. It is all about interaction and, you know, a lot of bio art, a lot of intermedia art that is really, really difficult to translate into online formats. And we kind of decided we will do it offline or we will not do it at all. And our term was in September and in October. So we were kind of calculating a little bit, you know, kind of, you know, adjusting to this summer period where in Croatia things were quite relaxed, and we were counting on it, you know, to stay a little bit relaxed in September, and so that we can do it. So this was from the production team, this was our, you know, starting point. Yeah, we did everything, almost everything offline. We had a few artist talks that were done digitally, but we did almost everything. And it was a really curious situation. For example, for the central exhibition, which is, I mean, the exhibition program is always kind of central to our festivals. It was, I think it was the easiest part, you know. We couldn't have all the artists there. It was really a big pity. Not only, you know, production-wise, okay, they cannot set up their work, you know, it's not a problem. You can do it remotely, it's okay, but, you know, you don't have the people there, you cannot do the discursive program as you wish, you don't have that community feeling, it's just missing, you know. But the exhibition was, I think, the easiest part. But when we came to the performances that were live and all of them were sound-based, that was a really, you know, tricky position, you know. How can you, and we also had, I mean, almost all of them were multi-channeling spatial sound performances. So, I mean, you know, come on, how can you do that online? It's kind of ridiculous, you know, to think about it. But we managed to do that. We had 5 performances. I mean, it was tricky logistically, you know, because the traveling restrictions are changing all the time. So, you know, with the program, you were really last minute, you know, on who will actually be there and do the performance. But we did it, and we tried to adapt in a way that we did it outdoors. So in a huge parking lot, since, you know, September is a really good time in Croatia weather-wise. It was warm, it was really nice, you know, so we managed to have actually a lot of live audience there. And we just, you know, we just took this huge parking space and said, okay, let's do it there. A lot of people can be there and we can have the social distance and everything. So that also we kind of managed, I think, well. But then, since our festival is not only based on presentations, exhibitions, performances, presentative forms, it is a lot about producing new artworks and working with artists from the very beginning, you know, from the idea to the final presentation or presentation of their process or whatever. That was, I think, the biggest difficulty, because we had quite a lot of commissions from artists, a lot of co-productions, and also in that period of spring 2020, we decided when we understood that the situation will not get better, you know, for artists working anywhere, we made kind of a strategical decision to invest more in these new artistic productions to give support to the artists, because they are not traveling, they are not, you know, presenting their works, and we commissioned more for the festival, and we were really happy about it. And it was a good decision, and it was easy to do with local artists, because, you know, we are all in Zagreb. It's still summertime was good, you know, we could meet, they can do what they do, we could visit their studios, we're doing it together, you know. It was good. But with international commissions, it was really strange, you know. I mean, how to do, a stay-at-home residency that was supposed to happen, in Zagreb and Dubrovnik, for example, for 2 months when, you were going to provide all the collaborators, all the material support, all the, things that you're providing for a residency, and then we just decide to do a stay-at-home residency. So it's such a paradox, how, we have never seen the work, we have never really communicated with the artists, so that was really strange. We did it anyways because, you kind of don't have a choice, in this moment, but it really made us question, is it a good way of doing things? Or how can we, is there an alternative, in these times? How do we solve this, huge puzzle? So this for me, I think, is the most interesting moment, because we really try to invest a lot in artists. It's really important for us to support new artworks, and I think this was the most challenging. Yeah, as I said, the festival was, in real life, and it was going really well. I think we managed to have audience numbers really similar to past years. Only the structure was, there was a lot of difference in structure because all the audience was local. No international audience almost at all. September and October also is really a big tourist month, for Zagreb. It's really busy, a lot of people, circling around, a lot of tourists, a lot of international people. So now only local people, but the numbers were there. So it was really, strange and good for us. Also, we were lucky to have a really big space, I think more than 3,000 square meters. So we were really able to, how to say, to control the audiences in the indoor spaces really easily. When you have such a big space, we were letting like 30 people in, and then 30 people again. So it was kind of okay. But this part of working with artists and really missing this materiality of the work, this is really something that is a point of discussion for our team also in these times.
To ask you, preparation of the next festivals, are you planning them in some, let's say, other forms, or are you have, let's say, parallel challenges or channels also using other media transmission and so on? Are you still somehow rely on the, let's say, improvement and to the fine situation?
Well, actually, we are really not discussing any online forms for this bigger event that we plan to have. For example, in June this year, we plan to have a really small, also sound art festival in Zagreb, and it is just, we just kind of agreed that this needs to happen either offline and in real life. I mean, we are okay, if we can have 20 people there in audiences, we will do, we will do the performance 5 times if needed. But it is just not, for us, it is not translatable in an online format now. I mean, I don't think that it is not translatable at all. But it is just not something that we can, grasp now. It is too big of a bite now for us. So we are kind of planning everything, to do everything offline and just see how much audience can we have, and try to stay flexible with the dates if we are able, to do so. But I mean, with live performances, it's just, the artist needs to be there. The artist needs to come, and if somebody doesn't want to travel or cannot travel, or needs to go to quarantine and has like kids and and just cannot do that, then you know. But yes, for us, this online format is just not fitting, you know, for now.
Thank you. I would just maybe continue in this case also somehow to try to involve David into the debate, because what I think, of course, I agree with both of you. And also I think that, let's say, the online transmission is just one channel, just one new media, not new, but let's say just one media in a way. And it's, I would say, also some kind of a progression, you know, from let's say from the prehistoric times, people were, I don't know, drawing on stones and dancing and singing and whatever, and this was their media, this was their messages in a way from the creators, but from the audience it was some kind of perception or also imagination. Then I would just jump, we can go into the, let's say, Middle Ages or a bit then to the invention of the book. You know, it was letter and illuminated manuscripts, and then also lithographs and so on in the books with some kind of spaces, animals, also imaginary creatures to give you perception. Then there were, let's say, black and white photographs, also with some faraway places, you know, from colonialist times, etc. There were color photographs, you know, and so people were some kind of one representing, the other were imagining how things were going on, how things see, how things look. Let's say, what's art all about, you know. Sometimes also there was only way to, let's say, to see art was from books, because the travel was not a commodity, the media was not suppressed, etc. Then it was radio, which to me in a kind is, I would say, the most controversial media in that kind, because I also listened, and there are some let's say, famous interviews like with David Sylvester, with Francis Bacon, etc., that you have a radio shows, you know, people talking about visual arts on radio, so completely audio art. So all you can do is to imagine what some paintings are and what people are saying. So this, I think, it's a pure form, like in a way music. On the other hand, you're playing music and you have, you know, all visions or stories or all novels in your head. Okay. Then it was television, yeah, and black and white, and so being the, I would say, the global media after radio, probably the first global media. And now it's internet, which of course it has the, let's say, almost infinite number of producers and almost infinite number of audiences or the receptors with all these contents. And I see in a way that the internet is some kind of a new television, you know, that as of course, I agree, you can't really present art online or in the television, but somehow, you know, people, we are used to this media presentation through various times, and somehow it makes it easier. But on the other hand, you know, when these all travels, etc., were so cheap and, of course, affordable to almost everyone, you know, it was quite easy to drive, I don't know, to Graz, to Zagreb, to Linz, to Venice, to Kassel, or to fly there and to see the festival, the TV show, or biennial, or whatever. And so I think maybe this is also the new perception, because from us, because all of these events were to us in, let's say, in the last 10 years reachable physically. No, but now before, or maybe, I don't know, 20, 30 years, were not so reachable physically, unless for, let's say, more rich people. But now we are missing this, and we are just somehow getting back to the television. So how do you think or get this, let's say, new media, internet, and all these platforms in a way as an addition to the art events, as a new channel, or in a way also a possible substitute, because, you know, to put the new content online instead of all these bad contents? Yes, please.
Yeah, I would like to just point out a few things. First of all, not not all of the world is that mobile. So even with the advent of low-cost travel, it isn't that easy if you're based in, you know, in the Middle East or in India, in East Asia, or in Russia, or, you know, in what is conventionally called a shitty country. You know, it's a little bit harder to travel like that, right? So, for an example, working in Russia and having curated shows in provincial Russia, like we curated together with Yekaterina a show in the city known formerly as Sverdlovsk. It's the third largest city of Russia, called Yekaterinburg. So we curated the first biannual they had there, and we experienced an audience that had never visited any of these festivals, you know, except for the maybe 2 curators in the city who were traveling. The entire audience was completely, you know, oblivious to this, and also nobody would travel there, actually. So, you know, we were already in COVID times there. And the thing that we were unhappiest about, I have to say at the time, is that we made a great show that was all about also remote production, but that we weren't able to, you know, we didn't know how to handle those virtual tools. So we didn't know how to document it properly. We didn't take care to put aside money to photograph the show properly. We didn't think about video excursions or anything like that, because that wasn't happening at the time. We were sort of naive in a way, and it was stupid because we were working at the same time as at an online portal, you know, for internet, we were the arts people at an online thing, and we were doing video productions, but somehow we didn't. Also, I agree, you know, for us, it's very valuable to build installations and to have live performances. And we didn't bring those things together. Now I think it's different. So now I think that I can't think a festival anymore without thinking how to make it accessible to people who won't be able to come. And that, I agree completely that that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is actually how to keep working with artists and how to maintain a living relationship with works, how to make sure that not all the practices that you feature are dematerialized, and yet broadcast them in their materiality. That's really challenging. And, you know, yeah, TV can do that sometimes, some of it, you know, and those are, as Peter Watkins, I think, had that great term, mono format. You know, it's a mono format. It's always like, it's very controlled format that where the curator obviously has a great also influence on what you see and how you see it. So I think what you were saying before about, you know, there's always the side of the, you know, since cave paintings, there's the side of the production and the side of those who are imagining what is this actually, you know. This we have to understand that equation better, and what to give people across material formats. On the other hand, I have to say that I think our whole, as epistemologically, our whole setup is based on maybe on some kind of false assumption, because if we think about it in a longer sort of sense, because what is an artwork and how is an artwork presented, of course, has this history of, you know, public political significance, of like an exposition, a presentation. It's making something public and, you know, putting it out there and presenting it to an audience. The audience is supposed to come and sort of be formed as a political subject in the moment of receiving an artwork. There's a sort of civic utopia behind what we do that actually is completely absent in the real relations that we tend to. So they're abstract. They're, you know, typically for bourgeois relations, they're abstract ideas of equality and entitlement that actually have behind them an incredible mechanism of exclusion. So this white cube that we work in, or, you know, the kind of traveling white cube that we carry around when we do site-specific work, is always, I heard, you know, you were saying, yeah, you know, we can work for an audience of 20 people. Yeah, we could before also. And this was our scope, 20 to 100, 200 people, when actually this thing that we're doing is much bigger. You know, so like Jacques-Louis David would have been scandalized to hear from us that we working for only 100 people. Why would you even do this then? You know, like, then you can just go make handbags or something, you know, like, that's fine. Which is a respectable profession, but I think there's a certain public claim to art, and you know, that in the postmodern era was anyway in disrepute for all kinds of very, you know, doubtful reasons that we have to uphold, that it becomes very difficult to do with this in this virtual situation, but we have to try. And this is, you know, so that was one of the things that we wanted to do with that project. Now, what do we do in the next project, and how will we be abused for not, you know, holding up the banner high enough or something? I don't know, actually, because I share with you also this sort of, you know, constant, even when you have a solution, the next project, all those solutions are, you know, it may not work anymore, and you have to keep thinking of a new one. A part of that problem is that there is no reliable public infrastructure. It's completely controlled and dominated by, you know, oligarchical vanity, collectors, weird NGO and state corporate sponsored setups where, you know, in the end, the audience for this is surprisingly limited. It's us and a bunch of sponsors. And that's really a dire situation. We have to get out of that, pandemic or not, you know. And so whatever's good. I mean, I'm very much for broadening audiences and using virtual and non-virtual and whatever, you know, and also getting artists curatorially, maybe moving artists into the situation where they, you know, you say, okay, you know, maybe this esoteric approach that you're using and that might be alienating part of the audience, maybe we think of a way to make the work itself also more accessible. You know, that would also be, I think, sometimes quite useful. But I don't, of course, as a curator, I don't go and dictate to artists how cryptic their work should be. But still, you know, it's a critique that maybe sometimes one could also take to heart. So that's my 2 cents on that.
I think it's such a good point that you made now. I mean, you know, because we had several situations where we are in part of, you know, larger European projects, networks, and since everything, you know, moved online, it was really naturally to do, you know, all the conferences, discursive programs, just to move it online and say, okay, we will just put the Zoom link out and, you know, everyone will come. So, I mean, of course, it didn't happen, you know, nobody came, you know. So it's a really, I mean, I think it's such a good point. I mean, because, you know, it is always, you know, it's, it's 20 people or less if you are online. That was our experience, you know. So it's really, I mean, and when we were talking to people, just, you know, our smaller community of artists and cultural workers, you know, just people you work with. And we are talking, you know, in a more informal situations. And they were saying, oh, did you go visit this festival online? Did you see this? Did you see this? And they're all, yeah, everything is in my schedule, you know, but I'm not visiting it because I'm, you know, in front of the screen the entire day. And then I have a really small amount of my leisure time and I just cannot do it, you know. I cannot do the screen anymore, you know. So I think I mean, it sounds kind of, you know, simplistic, but this oversaturation with screen time is really, I mean, I think it's a big issue, you know, because you're all the time you're online and you want to relax and, you know, maybe enjoy something and have your free time. And then you have to do it also, you know, online. And a lot of people just cannot do it, you know. So I think it's a big issue that nobody is kind of addressing because everyone thinks, okay, if it's a really good quality, people will visit. But it's not like that.
There was a fantastic thing that Bifo Berardi, the philosopher, said in a text that he wrote for the Paranoia TV reader that will be appearing soon. He said that Zoom and all of these other things will now always be subconsciously associated with illness, you know, with a sort of, and with a social pathology also that, you know, that comes with the virus, with the kind of media frenzy that comes with the virus. I think that's certainly the case. But, you know, at the same time, there is, I mean, I've had some really touching encounters over this medium. And, you know, like, yeah, on your sickbed, you could also have some kind of experiences. So I don't know, you know, like there is a saturation. I was surprised, though, I have to say, that some of the events that we had really drew audiences from places that we didn't usually reach. So this kind of Bildung, you know, this German term Bildungsbürger, educated citizen, bourgeois, who's a pensioner, and who probably by now is vaccinated, is actually not the only person who was attending. You know, like, so if we had those 50 people, maybe 2 of those people are sitting in Hong Kong, actually 3 of those people are sitting in New York. Like, that's interesting, because you have my son is starting to practice violin, so I'll shut up and also mute the microphone. You have a very diverse audience, actually, which is a great benefit to me. I mean, and that maybe that helps when you have someone sitting in Yekaterinburg who actually wants to know what's Srečko Horvat saying. So, you know, he or she should actually tune in, and this is happening. We see that from the statistics. What we don't see is that the audience is expanding massively. And here I agree with you. And it has to do also with the controlled structure of social media and how much money you put into advertising. And if you boost your posts and you start to really pay up in Facebook, then you can actually, you do see an increase of audience numbers, but that's really like, that's horrible, you know? I mean, that means that you have to really then also throw like half of a budget into, you know, and then everyone will see those 2 performances, everyone, you know. If you put like 500,000 euros you pay to Facebook, and then everyone will see this one thing that you do. This is kind of silly. I mean, that's not publicness, no? I mean, that's not what I mean when I say a public sphere or a popular or popularizing art. That's a kind of buying airtime. So I think also this legitimacy that comes from within, that was, you know, used to be known as the autonomy of art, is something that, you know, politically is hard in that, under those conditions, and also to maintain and to sort of publicize. But we have to find a way, you know, and maybe it involves building computer games, maybe it involves not doing that at all and refusing to do that. But I think that, you know, we have to sort of fight our own esoteric urges somehow. Okay. But I shut up so that my son can, I see that there are questions also too.
Yeah, great. So just maybe to start with the first question to both of you, of course, how have you noticed audiences changing in their spectatorship, like attention, concentration, expectation? Anna, maybe.
I think we didn't notice any real changes when we had live events, you know. I think we kind of saw that people were, you know, eager to attend something live, because there were not a lot of events in the city. But I think the biggest change was, you know, what I said, the audience was very local, and for us, we had a lot of limitations in comparison of how we do things usually. For example, for all our exhibitions, we really try to, you know, and we often succeed to work directly with schools. For example, to have school visits, you know, and this was, of course, not possible. So we were missing this diversity of audiences, you know. This was, I think, also really not a good thing, you know. But regarding the spectatorship, I think that there, I mean, maybe we were in a bubble, you know, where everything was really kind of old normal for us for that, you know, 2 months. But we didn't see any, you know, real changes. I mean, people were really interested. We had good discussions in discursive programs. It was, of course, really difficult to have, you know, real audience and then you know, a screen projection of someone talking from Australia and doing a lecture, and you cannot have like a Q&A situation that comes naturally, you know, when you are somewhere. But I mean, it was not so bad as we thought it could be, you know, with these online situations. So I think in our case, we were really happy, you know, we expected it to be much worse, you know, also audience-wise. We expected, you know, for them to be more maybe fearful, to come to a bigger crowd, but actually no. We were missing this diversity for sure in the audience context, you know. No kids, no guided visits, no, you know, teachers of biology bringing their kids to see some weird bio art where they are like, oh my God, I don't understand anything, but it's so cool, you know. So we are missing these moments, you know, that are really, really precious. But yeah, but I think we did, you know, what we could. We were happy with
it. We also, I mean, we noticed certainly in discussions, like live discussions, people tend to ask questions and say stupid things a lot more than on Zoom. That's one thing I noticed. Another thing I noticed is that, yeah, for films, it's conducive to much more attentive spectatorship. And I noticed that, you know, some people I talked to, at least, they'd really watch things to the end much more, and in a much, you know, repeating over and over again, really knowing what they were talking about. That was interesting. But I think that spatially, I mean, this is now, I'm now you know, entering hypothetical terrain, because we didn't actually make a big exhibition. And I'm very curious what you were saying, that, you know, with 30 people and so on. I can't imagine, as someone who's very much curating, you know, like with peripheral vision and with vision in the back of the head, like in a total environment, I can't really imagine what it's like to go to an installation or to make a good installation in a mask, because it's very hard to see, you know, peripherally what's going on. And that is, I think, you know, in terms of spectatorship, like once you have a physical limitation on what you actually, how vision works in a public space, there we really have problems. So like, can you approach, you know, like if you think of a classic Mark Rothko work, like that you have to approach, okay, you know, you can put all kinds of limitations, and like Rothko said, you're supposed to go up to 10 centimeters from the tip of your nose, and to really see this work and to really fully feel it. So, you know, of course, now it's a collector's item and you can't go so close. And, you know, in Moscow, for an example, when they showed it, they had security guards with beepers in the ear. So every time someone would go close, the security guard would be like electrocuted when you're going too close. So this is already creating an incredible ethical situation that goes completely like across Rothko, right? Because, you know, like you're hurting the guard. You shouldn't, you know, you indulging your own humanist impulses. You must look at the guard and be, you know, careful. So, you know, now it's like, you can't go too close, because the guard will then have to come and disinfect the canvas because you breathed on it. You can, under no circumstances, go anywhere near the thing. Keep a 2-meter distance, so you'll never be able to see Rothko, actually, the way that he wanted you to love his paintings. So, you know, this is, I think, you know, it's changed tremendously, because the kind of, you know, as you know, proximity and distance, the proximity of art actually is like really a 10-centimeter distance that is respected. The whole sexiness of it is that you don't go closer, but 10 centimeters is definitely like okay. Even a normal museum guard would say that, probably, you know, unless it's a child. And now, no, 2 meters. And with people from one another at this incredible distance. How are you supposed to work with experiences of claustrophobia, with experience of distancing and distancing a public? You know, artists love this stuff. I mean, to you know, to create a sort of feeling of distance. How do you do this? Yeah, everything is distance now. So how do you work with that? And I think that's that's going to be a huge challenge. Like once we come back, it's not just a question of formally reopening spaces and allowing people with passports into them. It's more about really also then finding new languages. And it's almost like conceptual art isn't very well suited to that, because we've all done that already. You know, like all those protocols, oh, we've played with all those already. They're all like, we invented them in the Fluxus times or something, you know, the stupidity of keeping 2 meters distance. It could be a Fluxus performance, a bad one. But, you know, like we can't, how do we play with that? There's no real playfulness to it, because this is real actually now. So yeah, I have, those are my thoughts. As you can see that I think we share this, that it's a sort of process that we have to, that all people who are curating festivals and lucky enough to be in that position also, it's not easy to find a job these days, certainly doing that sort of thing, is, you know, like we're all sort of like, yeah, okay, we try this, we try that, you know, maybe this works, maybe that works, and then hopefully some kind of public will be built for this, and hopefully something will emerge. I think I think what's coming here, though, is that it's a very interesting combination of a super specific local public that's also quite limited in some way, where you have to be super careful that it doesn't become too limited. And then it's a sort of, you know, weird international public that's also quite limited, and that's a very specific target group of, like, let's say the fans of David Graeber or the fans of the Critical Art Ensemble or whatever, you know, it's the people who are interested in this. So how do you bring those constituencies together into one bigger thing, which is what a festival actually is like when it's all those little constituencies coming together in a kind of constellation, and where they can also observe one another, not necessarily in a kind of panoptical and stupid way, but in a meaningful way. So, you know, that I think that we have a very interesting years ahead of us in order to build that. And I think it's not only the arts who are thinking about it, you know, film industry also is making steps in that direction. So for an example, I mean, I could go on and on with examples of how that could be happening, but it's always faces the, you know, the mono format challenge, I think. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a real debate. I just it came to my mind one example also from Zagreb, where we have this club, alternative club, that is really going on for like 30 years. They are really a really good musical club. They also do a lot of, you know, work with kids, also a lot with schools, a lot of cultural programs. They are really well known in Zagreb, and they are doing concerts all the time, you know. From the beginning of pandemic, they are doing concerts all the time, you know, 15 people, fine. 15 people sitting 2 meters, fine, you know. They're doing it all the time. And it's really strange, you know, how people react to this situation, because some people are like really happy, you know, okay, I can go to a live performance, doesn't matter, I will see it, you know, like totally, you know, bubble wraps, whatever needs to be done, I will just go and sit there and listen to this music, I really want it, you know. But other people are totally missing the entire experience. They're like, oh, what the fuck, you know, the bar is closed, I cannot just, like, literally speak to anyone, you know, it's really strange. It's only 15 people, they're missing the entire, you know, thing. So I think this is really curious, you know. Some people want it, some people don't want it, and then other people say, okay, only 15 people can, you know, attend. Then why don't you do it 5 times in a row so that we can also attend? Because, you know, once you send the email and you book your spot, then 15 people, and then, you know, that's it, you know. Yeah. So it's really strange, you know. So, I mean...
and that makes for a festival, that's very difficult, actually, because if you have to have, let's say, okay, you know, you have a piece, you know, we had smaller pieces like this in the previous festival, for an example, where Bojan Djordjev and Goran Ferčić made a piece in a hotel room. So this was like an audience of 30 people anyway, and we had to repeat it actually very, very many times, and it was not cheap because we had to do it again and again and again and again just to, you know, keep audiences circulating through. So it actually makes, you know, even though it was a small scale piece, I mean, it was a piece for a hotel room. It wasn't didn't have a big scenery or the whole institution of the theater behind it, but still it had to be maintained. And so if you multiply that across projects, you know, you're talking about a very different scale of festival in the end. And I think that's what, I mean, we're experiencing, you know, that problem, certainly. And we had that last time, that, you know, we were trying, as you, also trying to commission as much as possible in order to support artists, which is also like, that's another thing that festivals have to do now. No, I mean, because we're like the main, you know, one of the main ways that people are still making money, other than getting state support and drawing benefits. So, you know, that's, we have to actually put more into the commissions. We know that they're not coming. We know that we should pay a higher fee. And yet at the same time, you know, like all of these things actually multiply a project, so that it makes it very reluctant also to say, okay, do we really need this to be live? Maybe it's better as a TV series. And there you start making also all kinds of curatorial compromises, probably, and, you know, down the road, once the novelty of it has worn off, I think that that's where the real problems also will begin. You know, that the boat will always be full in advance. So that sucks for a festival, because the festival should have a degree of openness. You know, it should be a process, as you were saying, of working with artists, of working with the public, of bringing new things. Sometimes things come in, you know, in a kind of very random way, and they fall into your thematic conception or whatever, and it's very great luck. How does that supposed to happen if everything is in advance predetermined, and, you know, and so on? So I think we have those new limitations are going to be really rough. Also, it's not just about an audience having to wear a mask or to keep a distance, but it's also about these repetitions, actually, that you mentioned just now, that are a huge problem for programming.
Yes, thank you. I would just maybe now like somehow to continue in the way you, of course, set up things. But I see it on some stage, you know, now as a, let's say, as a formal issue, in a way, as an issue of media, as an issue of, I would say, physical or online or virtual interaction, and of course, in the way of our senses, our, of course, perceptives and perspectives also, and in a way, also as some kind of, I would say, an addition, a new channel to have internet, which instead, like you were all the time mentioning, you know, being focused, or not focused, but let's say being in real with the mainly local audiences or limited numbers of audiences. Also by coming online, you can reach the global audiences. Yes, and so just maybe, you know, going a bit back into history, I think in the 60s, there were first big or nationwide television events. And of course, you remember, yeah, the Beatles transmission of All You Need Is Love. And then we will remember, let's say, Band 8, you know, in the UK and the US. It meant, you know, in 85, it was globally transmitted, you know, from both continents. And nobody of us really, at least myself, who was quite young at the time, couldn't imagine to be there in presence. So I think such possibilities like we are having with the virtual, I would say, transmission of our events online, it's of course to somehow address new audiences, to somehow attract global audiences, you know. And also with our experience, let's say once we have, I don't know, 100 or 200 or 300 or 1,000, I don't know, audience live in space, now we are having a couple of thousands, you know, just maybe not at the same time, the same place, but somehow trying to refer or to follow the content. But then on the other hand, I would just like to mention it on the content wise, with such, I think, unintentionally, of course, because it's caused by the pandemics, with bringing the culture, contemporary arts festivals, or like, I don't know, container tree festivals or Steirischer Herbst, or etc., KIBLIX in Kibla, and of course Ars Electronica and so on. We are somehow culturalizing the internet. You know, I think it's some kind of a subversive act on the mainly, who can say, I don't know, regarding the information, quite a messy media, quite banal media, somehow even primitive media now, ruled, like you, David, mentioned, of course, by the so-called social networks, which are basically completely in the opposite logic, you know, because internet should be as a public infrastructure, as a public good, and so we should exchange information and do whatever, you know, for free, even if there is some other interest. And so by now, by filling the channels, the lines, the internet with our content, maybe at last, you know, after so many years, I would say after 60 years of, let's say, visual transmission, or Namjoon Paik, even earlier from the online, we can again somehow concentrate to bring contemporary art, to bring cultural content online, and somehow to try to, let's say, emancipate from the other concepts that are overwhelming the media reality, you know, from fake news, from all the Twitters, bullshits, from, of course, etc., etc. So this, I think, could be also our, let's say, inspiration, you know, to not just be closed in our bubbles of our institutions, of our festivals, of our offices, but just go online, just make the, I would say, you know, the TV channel which can somehow gather different production, different institutions, different artists, different curators, and to structure it into the so-called, I would say, media that can have the influence and that can also be seen and heard in the global way. But of course, each of us will still be doing festivals in Zagreb, Graz, Maribor, and so on and so on. So yes, please, if you can somehow continue. David.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right, and I think that there's something that very interesting that happened, because of course it was clear what social media were, and the utopia of social media as something that was purely positive evaporated quite some time ago. We know this somehow. It's a part of public opinion, and in such a massive way, this dystopian vision of the internet, that, but at the same time, in the art world, it was always the domain of a kind of specialty production, you know, like it was something that artists would specialize on, and then, oh, he's like, oh, he or she is they're a post-internet artist, or there's someone who's working with digital media, you know, like it was a specialty thing. And to invite them into a normal installation setting was also always tricky, because, you know, how do you translate that into the kind of physical media that you're working with, and how do you visualize that? So that became also a whole domain of fetishism, I think, over the last decade. You know, what happens now is that people who have no connection to this specialty, and also no vested stake in fetishizing the internet especially, are moving online. And that does, I think, there, it becomes a very interesting movement that is subversive, not by dint of, you know, some theorizing of like, how do I crack this code, or, you know, like, how do I hack culture? But rather it's just like, you know, if enough people go there, then something changes. And that's, to me, actually in some ways more interesting, even though I would tend to also, you know, like you probably, to think of everything in this kind of subversive culture hacking way. But I think that actually, you know, the fact that Anya Netrebko or whatever, you know, like these like people who are completely alien, like who have nothing to do with our, you know, sophisticated media art thing, are going there, that's I think very significant, and that changes things because it forces the social media also to adapt new strategies to be less, and to sort of consider that audience at least. What happens then is a whole nother degree of complexity, but it allows maybe for some kind of recapturing of political significance that was lost in this white cube setting, in this bubble. So I agree with you fully in that way. I just don't think that it can be a specialty anymore. It can't be something that is consigned, like, oh, we have the transmediale for that. No, it's everywhere now. The problem is everywhere. It's with classical music, or with opera, or with pottery, or with blues guitar. It's everywhere, so we should be very, aware. I think also in the way that we do these festivals, maybe we need to broaden the scope of what we're doing and sort of look at, non-artistic stuff also that could fit actually into our whole, more, as you say, subversive view of the world. So that's, yeah.
Anna, please, if you can add something to that point of
yeah, I don't know really what to add. I mean, I completely agree. It's a mind-bending topic, it just came to my mind when I was listening to one talk, one of the very few talks that I was listening from festivals abroad last year. It was from an art director, festival director from Hong Kong, and she was speaking about how they decided to do the festival online, and she was speaking a lot about the community. And she was always saying that they wanted to keep the community alive, so they decided to do it online, because it's better to do it online than not to do it at all. And it was really, curious for me to think about it. I mean, what is the community, the festival community online, It certainly is there, but it's kind of completely transformed, or is it not, It's really, it's a really curious topic. And this community part for the festival is really important. We were missing this a lot, last year, because you are missing so many artists, and then, a few of them were here, of course, but, usually we have like 20 artists or more, at least 30, and it really is a community for this at least 10 days, you really get to know each other and make some really good connections. And so not only audience-wise, but in this more, enclosed circle of a festival where you really, network is such a, ugly word. You really connect, with some people. So this was really missing. So when she was, for example, talking about this community, I was wondering, what is this community, How do you interact with these people, You do interact, but it's really completely different. I think it's also, I agree with you, Peter, it's kind of full of possibilities also. We need to really start to, explore that in a more meaningful way, in a more serious way.
Just maybe again, I think I fully, of course, support this way of, let's say, joining the both perspective of art production, so physical and virtual, because on the other, I would say, just from the practical point of view, now you can see the luxury in a way, that we can be at home and we can just discuss and be online, which of course it's also from my point of view ironical, and we don't need to move, we are not in danger on the road, we don't have this stress, we are again with the family and so on and so on, and we can do, let's say, some other stuff. But on the other hand, it's also, there are people who just can't attend an event, I don't know, because it's sold out, no tickets, or or they are ill, or let's say they are handicapped in the way, just they can't move, or in a way they're just from other side of the world, but they are interested in this, and I can just say that once, dealing with so-called media art, because of course everything, I think it's in a way media art, and then, having some kind of the, I would say, most area defined media in our art. It's like the internet and new technology, not using it for its, I would say, primary purpose, which is of course also communication. It's somehow, I would say, a scene, not being using it for such a long time, and still having this exclusiveness to being there on site, which I fully support and I agree with that. But then again, talking about attracting or growing or whatever audiences, which is very popular. Instead of filling up, halls or arenas or stadiums with hundreds of thousands of people, you might have still, your, 200 of local audiences with some international guests. When it's possible to travel, then you can have, 100,000, of global audiences, people who are following you or interested in the event. Like I mentioned, we were all at the TV sets whole day and whole night into the 1985 when the Live Aid was going on. So this is, yes, some kind of the new culture also, because we see, or at least from my point of view, the television is not an issue anymore because it's getting more and more banal and stupid. And I think the really user-generated contents, in a way, if we can say name us users, or of course we are also the creators in a way of these contents, that we can really somehow upgrade the media, the overall media situation, and I would say also the relevance of the art and culture topics, and also the somehow the consequence in the, let's say, people attentions, like we have concentration, expectation. Maybe there could be some race, some awareness race, of a new concept, instead of being brainwashed and etc., etc. Please.
I think what's very interesting, so about this community, just getting back to what you were saying, and about community feeling and keeping the community. So one of the big things that always in Graz is a big issue also before the pandemic is, the audience, the community, the audience there wants its festival feeling. And how do you define that? It's also quite actually doubtful thing. So I think there one also, that's another place where one has to intervene and redefine what that actually means in a less, maybe like before it was less, responsible to talk about a community. Now it becomes something very concrete, and it becomes something that's more purposive maybe than just getting together and having a good time, or even getting together and having a good time takes on a completely different meaning than it had before the pandemic. So we're expecting, and we're going to actually now try to, work with this festival feeling, try to create it somehow in the city, much more than we did before, because we sense that there's an expectation, or not even an expectation, but a need, a real need for people to go out and do something and experience something in real. But how do you, again, that is to me really complicated, how that exists in parallel to the virtual communities, to online communities that are emerging all the time, and that in our case would have the benefit, like if it were done really seriously. I mean, we know this from being in curating and being in these kind of collectives where you're having meaningful discussions over a distance. You could be, like I worked on this project once where people were working in Bolivia, in, I don't know, in Asia, in Germany, in Russia, all over the place, in the United States, like on the same thing. And we formed a community, definitely. And we all also really liked one another. And when we got together physically, we were very, friendly, and definitely like there was a community feeling. So I think, one of the ways that might emerge over the years is that it's less based around events like a festival opening, but the festivals actually stretch and gain new forms of durational attention, where people are actually drawn into research projects or endeavors, where there's a kind of longer attention span being cultivated, much in the way that you have fandom of, you know, these kind of serials or whatever. But, you know, maybe it's a while off. Maybe we're still, I often think that we're still very much hostage to modernist paradigms that very also, you know, really at the same time stimulate us, you know, when we fight against them, and completely paralyze us actually in situations like this when the objective and subjective relations are in question. For me, one of the big benefits of the internet has nothing to do with visual communications. It's actually about text and about the availability of incredible amounts of text. So I read, and like all the translation and theory work I do is all based on that, you know, like, and I'm always online, and it's often text from like the 18th, 19th, you know, earlier centuries. And you know, what do you do with that? That I don't see at all reflected in that quite superficial, you know, social media, Netflix, you know, TV. This is the new TV thing, because, you know, actually we're in this kind of Gutenberg cosmos still. It's just on the screen. So, you know, like, what do you do with that? I don't know. And what happens with that under lockdown conditions, I have no idea. I'm using it more massively than ever, I can tell you. And the communities built around those texts tend to be more solid than, you know, like if we all love, I don't know, Harun Farokhi or something, you know, like that doesn't form such a great community. If we're all reading Marx constantly, you know, like maybe that actually is more important. So, or Hegel or something, you know, like that. I see that the social media then also come alive in a completely different way when somebody's suddenly talking about Hegel, like all my stupid friends, you know, come out of the corner. And this is, I think that kind of community actually is really, you know, it's the kind of nerdy community that maybe will inherit a bit of that energy, you know, like that actually where you feel like, oh, that's alive. It's not just some superficial party or something. How do you bring that into a festival? No idea. And I've never tried. And, you know, I maybe wouldn't even try, but maybe I should. But, you know, like there's no way, there's no mechanism so far to bring those things together. So.
Ena, please.
Yeah, but now when you were talking both about this brainwashing context on the internet and also attention span, you know, I think that a lot of effort is being made now in the past year from a really wide, you know, cultural and artistic community to really change things that are happening online, and not festival-wise, but information-wise. So, for example, to, you know, redesign or build some platforms that offer really in-depth context, for example, for artworks, you know, which you kind of don't have now, or how to, you know, transform the academic education, you know, towards more interdisciplinary, but really interdisciplinary research, you know, where you can access a lot of different materials very easily and very, you know, naturally, you know, only through some topic or some connected, you know, notions. You cannot do that now. You have a lot of databases, a lot of repositories, but you cannot do it like naturally in a really online environment that is more, you know, fluid or more designed or programmed to you know, navigate through really differently. So I think a lot of projects are now, you know, going on that are really focused on that, how information is contextualized online and what is really accessible, you know, about something, about an artwork or a text or whatever. I think this is really exciting, you know. It is not linked directly to festivals, but it kind of is, you know. In an online context, it definitely is. So I think that is, I mean, there is a lot of potential there. And yeah. Some new questions.
Hello, yes, I will read another question. I noticed criticism becoming difficult through the epidemic as things seem to switch to survival mode. trying to preserve something pre-existing. How can we also preserve or activate the critical element of festivals? Isn't that particularly important in current media or public situation?
Yeah, no, I think that it's very important, and that we should, you know, resist the survival mode. You know, to preserve what was pre-existing is no point, because it was what was pre-existing was fraught with exactly what we see now, and what we see is a result of what was pre-existing. So to go back to what was pre-existing, you'll get the same result actually later. I find it very disconcerting that the left in Germany, for an example, largely supports zero COVID as a strategy, which has all these authoritarian aspects to it that you know, like any, you know, leftist in their right mind should resist immediately. At the same time, I find it very disturbing that the people who are resisting, you know, like those you know, questionable measures that might not have scientific backing are then, you know, neo-Nazis. That's also lovely. So, you know, we're in a situation where indeed the political parameters maybe of criticism are shifting, where we have to critique those, and where we have to look very carefully. I think, you know, yes, festivals need to take on a very strong critical stance. The only question is, what language do you like? Which theoretical language, or how do you find an idiom to do it that isn't completely alienating to a broader audience? Because that kind of, you know, like, we're very critical, and we have a relationship to the world that's very responsible and negative, and, you know, holding up negativity as a kind of as something that's very hard for other people to deal with. Actually, it's annoying, quite frankly. And what's also annoying is a kind of wokeness, you know, like, we're very critical in terms of like the way that culture is sexist, racist, homophobic. We have a great language to describe our criticism, but that then comes across as being very actually dogmatic and restrictive. Not that that criticism is wrong, and please don't get me wrong, I don't want to slam wokeness here, but I just want to say that there's a problem with the critical language itself, with the way that it translates from academia into real life, with the way it translates from the art world back into academia, and that those circuits actually need to be heavily interrupted in order for that all to make sense. I think that the survival mode is not just because we're all afraid of getting infected. I think it's because there was a serious problem before the pandemic, and this is why people are so prone to say, oh my God, you know, like, we can't continue in the same way, or we can, but we can just continue and stick to your lane. This is like, I think that that's the survival mode that's more, you know, widespread. It's like, you know, I'm doing a critique, for an example, if I were to say, I'm a Marxist, I'm an Orthodox Marxist, I'm only studying, you know, Soviet Marxism of the 1930s, and I will do only this. And like, what you ask me now about Black Lives Matters, it's not my domain, and I don't want to say anything about it, actually, because I would offend you. And the same thing would go then, you know, like, in all the directions. So that's the survival mode that we're all in. It's to stick to your subject, stick to your lane. Don't look for those, you know, intersectionality. This is a term that doesn't mean much. And when a festival proclaims that and doesn't follow through, it's a counter-critical strategy. So that's very complex. I'm sorry to go on for so long, but I think, you know, our embedded, I think it was Irit Rogov who many years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, talked about embedded criticality. This was the time of the Gulf War and embedded reporters and so on. And she spoke about criticality as something being, you know, firmly entrenched in the system, because of it also has this kind of, you know, theological language that it wraps itself in. And I think that that's a very valid point. This kind of embeddedness is, you know, it's an alienated embeddedness that we have to fight against, and we have to find a different way to be critical, popular, and to address people's concerns. People are fucking critical of Facebook and reality, sorry to curse, you know, and people are angry. And a lot of that anger is then misplaced and put into other, and we want them to be nice and to get, read Adorno. And actually, this is not happening. So, as much as I like Adorno and all that.
Anna, please, if you can also answer the question.
Oh, yes, I wanted to say 10 different things now at the same time, but yeah, maybe to come back to our festival, that was, as I said, it's called Touch Me Festival, which really, it was a pun, for 2020 also, for this year, even though the festival is going on for 15 years now, but it was really strange, to have Touch Me Festival in 2020, but the topic was actually connected to interspecies relations, and I was not curating that festival. My colleague were curators for this program last year, but for example, what stuck to my mind was one critique from an art historian from Zagreb that we really appreciate, and she said that she's always, of course, looking in an exhibition or a festival program, she's always looking for, the connecting line between all the entire program, all the exhibiting artworks, all the talks, everything. And she said that she, for our festival, she thought that it was a really radical but positive inclusiveness, which was a really, I think, curious thing to say. So, for example, how you can, really rethink this critical approach. It is not always, negative. It is kind of a positive thing, because I think in our program, all the artworks were kind of, positive in the basic feeling, not really critical in this dystopian way, but kind of a more, we look towards a brighter future, between species in that way. So I think that survival mode can also be critical and kind of positive in the basic feeling. I don't know, I didn't answer the question, but it was just a thought, and it was a really strange and a nice thought to have, in the middle of pandemic, that maybe, there is something that is not only survival mode.
Yes, in a way, also I would maybe somehow compare the survival mode, like in a way of, individualistic, like we all now pushed, and also, like David mentioned, egoistic or egocentric in a way, but not in a positive, but in just some kind of elbow moving way. But on the other hand, now just in these times of pandemic, we can see in a way, and of course also experience how the world is looking when the epidemiologists are ruling in a way, because viruses were present through all history, that they were like every day is a virus and you can't stop them. I think they're one of the most substantial migrants. The viruses are migrating there, the borderless, not like no borders, no nations, they are, transnational, etc. And they even attack like animals, people, anything that can make their or enhance their survival or prolong their survival. And also, it's quite funny on some other stages, the consequence of the epidemics, that apart from, let's say, our topics of moving art productions online and still having them offline in real space, there is a loss there are quite many losses on some other fields, just I think the loss of democracy, of democratic policies, because of the all these objections, rules, situations, forbiddance, and so on. And on the other hand, there is also some kind of, I think, new practices rising of doing this, of collaborating, maybe even in small groups, maybe making some other things that can be produced, in the different online societies, and also shown as a part of the, let's say, not only virtual reality art, but also the new media. And on the other hand, by following again all these restrictions, we can't move across the borders. We are even closed in our municipalities. Lots of the culture or art institutions are closed. There is, of course, almost no production. And like you mentioned, both with coming closer to an art object or even touching it, it's like also, it started that it's forbidden to come close to another person less than 2 meters, or touching it, it was almost you got to jail by seeing, by touching somebody and being seen by somebody. So it's getting, I think, quite of a new behavior into society of this kind, which of course will take the consequence. And on the other hand, it's showing the fragility, the fragility of the system, of our system, the fragility, of course, of the society, if you want, of the country or the state, and even let's say the cultural sector or the artistic production. And even though now you have, like I said, more independent, bigger, smaller, etc. festivals, and which is also, I think, quite a positive issue, is that we were taught here by this, that money is not problem at all. This is now all these measures of the European Union also, like pouring money into society for recovery after the epidemics, and for the next, let's say, economic progression. Of course, like a green economy, digitalization or digital economy, and resilience, of course. It's all, I think, again, compliant with art and artistic production and culture. Just in a way, we can name, of course, the artistic cultural production in a way, circular economy or green economy. We can also have it in the field of digitalization, and of course, like we all now discussing here tonight, it's of course also resilience, but also in a way of resistance, and also of course in a way of trying to find our space, maybe to set the whole, let's say, Gesamtkunstwerk of artistic products into various areas, online and offline. And just maybe if we wrap up or just conclude this slowly, if you can maybe just let us know what is your next festival plan to be like. What are you thinking? If you also overlooked any new strategies or anything, of course, don't tell us secrets, but just maybe something. What's your future planning looking like?
I can start. Yeah. Just really briefly, I can't say too much except that what I said before, maybe just to say that again, there's an expectation or a need for a festival atmosphere, whatever that means, for maybe necessitates looking in different directions than we usually look. I don't know though how that will turn out in the end. And I have to say that, this is, I think that to really, you'll see that festivals will have to adapt very strongly, and will have to adapt also. The whole idea of thematic curating will have to change. the way that we've relied upon the institutions to sort of project onto them themes and thematic narratives has to be restructured. It's not just a question of finding new media, addressing new constituencies. We've talked about all of that for now, but it's also actually a way of finding a new mixing, a new working with, on the one hand, contingencies, you know, like the way that the media actually works, and media production works is much more about contingency and about the contingency of the moment. But it's also about other things. It's about finding an approach and still, you know, being able to construct threads that produce meaning without approaching it in a kind of post-Duchampian curatorial way, which means, you know, setting up a certain social situation and then sort of letting it play through and being the Uber artist, you know, like that way of authorship may actually be in crisis along with those institutions. And I think for us as curators, that was the big shock over the last years, is that all of our curatorial recipes are becoming less and less, you know, more and more dysfunctional in a way, and that we have to find a new approach. So I think whatever we do is going to be, you know, very much a step away, I hope at least, a step away from the kind of authorial thematic curating that we've practiced so far. But it doesn't mean that it's just this kind of blah, you know, and like making a selection and giving out money to people. I think it has a lot of actually a new way of taking responsibility for content, but maybe it's less connected to the idea of the collector and the idea of the, you know, the kind of public collector in lieu that the curator always was. It has more to do with being a producer, but not a producer who's out to make money, but a producer who's out to build meaning. So that's the kind of general orientation, but I can't say much more. I can say only that, you know, we will have more kind of atmospheric stuff that we'll then try to transmit, and that is going to be the second really, you know, important part, is continuing to broadcast without being a fictitious broadcaster. How do we do that, and how does it not seem stupid for a festival to do that? That's very, you know, tough. That's going to be a tough bill, you know, a tough gig. So we're already in the middle of it, and you know how that goes. It could also be a dud, you know, it could also be a flop. And I think we have to, in our practice, this is something we don't say in public, right? We don't say, oh, you know, I'm about to make a really terrible festival. And I'm not saying that, but you know, maybe we also have to find a way actually to be less vain, you know, and to sort of say, yeah, maybe it doesn't work, and maybe our whole thing is dysfunctional, and we have to, you know.
No, could be also now like a new profession, a curator of online festivals.
We're the pioneers of this new profession, and you know, oh boy, somebody is watching this in 50 years and then said, oh, they really didn't know what they were doing. It's almost as bad as the modernists. They were just as confused, just as terribly wrong in many ways.
Anna, please, to finish the debate. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, our plans, I mean, we are going to try to have live events as much as we can, but in parallel to that, we are, as I already said, we are involved in a few initiatives that are doing this research and design of new online platforms that are trying to, you know, put some information into different contexts, artworks into different contexts, just to correlate things a little bit more regarding bioart, also in the academic education context. So this is what we are really investing a lot of our time into nowadays, and I think it's really important. But also what is going on for a few years now for us, and it's not so closely related to the pandemic, but I think it's important in these times. It's the education part. not only education for artists and audiences, but also for us as cultural workers and for younger cultural workers. So we have a lot of programs that are dealing with that, and it is just something that we feel that is lacking, not only in Croatia but overall. So we are making really big efforts to move some things in this area, and we will see how that goes. But yes, as for the online festival situation, I think that we will probably not do an online festival, but just try to have a different, maybe more substantial or more complex presence online through these new platforms that we are trying to, start. And maybe, David, maybe it will be a failure, but I think it will be a good failure. It is good to try. This is the time to try.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. Thank you very much for having us, and yeah, it's been a very stimulating and fun discussion. So I'm very glad that we were able to join here and create this small community for a few moments.
Yes, thank you, Anna, and thank you, David, and hello to Zagreb, hello to Berlin from Maribor, and let's meet live as soon as possible, not online. And
Okay.
like Anna concluded, let's try.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yes.
Okay. Have a nice evening.
And for everybody is following us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Peter Tomaž. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, David. And thank you, Gerfried, for being with us tonight. Thank you to the audience who've been watching us online. And for more on our KIBLIX program, follow us on our social media or our webpage, kiblix.org. Thank you, take care, and see you soon.